Welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS and a very warm welcome to our weekly review of international events. We prepare this collection of events from all over the globe for those who are aspiring to appear successfully, hitting the top spot in the civil service examinations. And what we try every time to do is to cast a look, a critical analytical look at whatever is happening all over the globe. What kinds of events impact on our foreign policy, can impact on our national interest, and how should India respond to it? And the past week has been full of exciting events. India has had to cope with the unexpected fallout of some loose talk by the official spokespersons of the ruling party, which have created a groundswell of criticism for India in Muslim countries. And India has done well to respond to it with some restraint and some realism. We shall come to that. The world has also been watching with keen interest what is going to happen in United Kingdom, where the Prime Minister Boris Johnson was facing a no confidence motion. He has come out from the no confidence motion. He can't be challenged for another year with another no confidence motion. But the problem is that his prime ministership has come back even more weakened after this successful quote-unquote confidence vote for Boris Johnson. So he remains a lame duck prime minister, and what is going to be the impact of this on the world, we shall see. Another interesting development has been the Indians trying to open up some kind of a back channel dialogue, not so much a back channel dialogue, it is quite on the front foot. A joint secretary of the Ministry of External Affairs has visited Kabul and tried to negotiate with the Taliban the humanitarian assistance which India is supposed to deliver on a regular basis to Afghanistan. As if this is not enough, we have more on our plate. There has been another tragic shooting in a school in the United States, which has brought into focus the absolutely brutal, ruthless kind of behavior by those who support the gun lobby and the National Rifle Association of America, which is the group which supports the armaments industry and is worried about the sales of hand arms. And there have been thousands of innocent lives lost in America because of this, but the Americans somehow believe that this is their fundamental right from the days of revolution to bear arms in self-defense. But what about the defense of the people who are killed by these handguns? We shall talk about this also. 105 days of the war in Ukraine are over, and is having a very adverse impact on the trade, the global trade of food grains, food security. Not only on that, on spares of the weapon systems which India and other countries had bought from Russia at one time. We'll have a look at all this and discuss this with you. The issue we wish to begin with you this time is the unexpected crisis which brewed because of certain reckless statements made by the official spokesman of the ruling party, because this allows us to appreciate how domestic politics impacts on foreign relations, diplomacy, and how international relations elsewhere do impact on our domestic policies. It has often been said that foreign policy of a country is a projection of its domestic policy. And this is what seems to be happening this time. But first of all, let's take a look at what the crisis is, what its magnitude is. The crisis started with some innocuous tweets on the social media. One official spokesperson, a high-profile spokesperson of the ruling party, said something which was offensive to the honor of the Prophet Muhammad, and this was compounded by another person, another national spokesperson, who made similar statements and tweeted again. Now, one of them was participating in a television debate, used language which was intemperate, uncivil, unacceptable, almost bordering on hate speech. But long has been India's stance that this is our internal matter. We can handle hate speech, we can look after freedom of expression, we support freedom of expression. So all shades of opinion should be expressed freely and fearlessly. We also know how to deal with our minorities. We are very sensitive to their rights, fundamental rights, and we treat them humanely. Others have a different view. But this time, what became very acute was that the moment this thing became newsworthy, there was a battle fought between the supporters, what are called the andhabhakts of the ruling party, and the libtards, the liberal critics of the ruling party, who are often condemned as seculars. But what happened was it was not confined to the domestic scene. The debates were not confined to TV studios or to the social media. Qatar, a small country of less than 30 lakh people, issued an ultimatum to the Indian government, so to speak. They called the Indian ambassador, gave him a démarche, said it was unacceptable, and they were looking for an apology. Now, this aroused the ire of Indians, some Indians, patriotic Indians, too much. They said, what is Qatar? It is smaller in size than many a municipality in India. They forgot that Qatar may be small in size than many municipalities in India, but no municipality in India, not even all of India put together, is sitting over the largest liquid gas reserves in the world. So they have such a crucial bearing on the energy security of the world, especially in the aftermath of the Russian-Ukrainian war, that nobody can look down on Qatar because of its small size. Some other people were even more ridiculous in India. They said that there are far many more Indians in Qatar working than the original population of the Arabs in Qatar. This again is a very fallacious and a stupid argument, if one may say so, because the Indians who are working there in search of a better future, better incomes, better quality of life, remittances home. Kuwait has the luxury of getting rid of these Indians, which might be 2 times, 3 times more than the original inhabitants of Qatar, and get them substituted, replaced by other workers from Bangladesh, from Pakistan, and even from non-Islamic countries like Philippines. So I think it, again, in Qatar, there was the rising wrath and there was a boycott of Indian products on the shelves. This again irritated Indians who said, let's start boycotting products from Qatar. Let's start boycotting services from Qatar. Now, one person even suggested we should stop using Qatar Airways. Now, all this is extremely naive because Qatar is not so dependent on imports from India as India is dependent on oil and gas from Qatar and other Gulf countries. But the crisis was not confined to Qatar. At the same time, the crisis continued to snowball. The countries in UAE, Abu Dhabi and co. were no less harsh of the criticism of Indian spokespersons and wanted an explanation from the Indian ambassador. It happened in Saudi Arabia, it happened in Oman, it happened in Iran. Some people jocularly said that what Indians had done was to bring two lifelong bitter enemies, Iran and Saudi Arabia, on the same side as far as this is concerned. The Organization of Islamic Muslim States was agitated about this. There were 16 to 18 countries, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Malaysia, Indonesia included, who objected to what had been said by this. Now, why we must devote some time and space to this issue is because the government of India, not only the government of India, the BJP party distanced itself immediately. It expelled one of the spokesmen from the party, it suspended the other from the party. But at the same time, there was no law which was allowed to take its course. If these statements were offensive enough to expel and suspend a spokesperson, why were cases about hate speech not or inciting communal ill will filed against them? Why was the FIR not registered? Why additional security was provided for at least one glamorous celebrity spokesperson rather than to apprehend her and ask her to explain her conduct and so on? So the action taken against this was not swift. Then again, the spokesperson of the Ministry of External Affairs did his best to explain away these things, saying that these views are not shared by the government of India. This again is a special argument because if the ruling party is BJP, obviously the government has to follow the dictates of the party which has the majority in the parliament. So we can't separate the party and the government so conveniently, so easily. What was even more distressing is the utter total silence of the Indian Prime Minister. The Indian External Affairs Minister was critical. He talked about Pakistan, that Pakistan should not worry about it. The countries which have a bad record in human rights should not lecture to us. But in this case, it was not a question of freedom of expression. It was not a question of human rights violation. It was a question of insulting the Prophet and hurting the religious sentiments of people, not only the Muslim citizens in India, but Muslims all over the world. The crisis takes an international dimension because immediately Al-Qaeda issued threats that they would mount suicide attacks on Delhi, in Mumbai, in Chennai, in Bangalore to teach India a lesson that how they should honor and respect Hazrat Muhammad the Paighambar. Now, the problem is that some Indians still continue to argue that why these Muslim countries, autocratic countries, theocratic countries keep silent when China is persecuting the Muslims in Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang, and why blatant violations or hurting the sentiments of Muslims is taking place. Now, here again we must realize that in international relations, the only currency which is recognized is hard power. Now, no country in the world is in a position to take on the hard power of China. So they will lump a lot when China is concerned. But India at the moment cannot expect to be treated as the same as a permanent member of the veto-wielding member of the Security Council, a country with much greater military muscle, and more important than anything else, the second largest economy in the world. So I think what we should be very careful about is that this incident should allow us to appreciate that how the External Affairs Ministry in India should always be prepared to damage control when some member of the ruling party makes a statement which may have very detrimental consequences on India's national interests. Let us not forget that one of the great achievements of Prime Minister Narendra Modi in the past 8 years has been to build up a special relationship with Saudi Arab, with UAE. He's been awarded the highest civilian decorations of these two countries. The trade has increased. He has been very warmly received time and again. And both these countries, which have an Islamic fraternity with Pakistan, have snubbed Pakistan more than once. It would be a great tragedy if some hot-headed motor mouths in the ruling party ruin what has been built up so assiduously, so carefully over the past 8 years and hurt India's national interest. One small word before we conclude. We use the phrase damage control. What we require is more than damage control. How many times will you confine to band-aid diplomacy? We will have to assure the world is not only the question of American senators who work as a lobby for their Pakistani friends. We have to worry about the nature of relationship which we have had, centuries-old relationship with countries like Iran, and very, very warm relationship which has been cultivated by Prime Minister Modi in the past 8 years with UAE and Saudi Arab. We cannot afford to jeopardize this. So we have to understand very clearly the relationship between domestic politics and international relations and diplomacy. A problem of this kind has happened in past about the CAE, the National Citizenship Register, and with the friendly neighbor Bangladesh next door. So I think we have to be careful about this, not only be patient, but be very, very careful. And this relationship should not be lost sight of between domestic politics and international relations. For electoral gains, for purposes of polling campaigns, we might say things which might hurt us very badly, damage our national interest in long run. The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson sure seems to lead a very charmed life. People had thought that after the Partygate scandal came out in the open, that he would be shamed and made to resign. He was caught lying more than once to his monarch, keeping her dark. He has been accused more than once of misleading the parliament, being economical with truth. But somehow or other, his flamboyant, charismatic personality seems to aid him into browbeating his opponents and bluffing and blustering his way through. This is what again seems to have happened one more time. He has not lost the no confidence motion which was presented against him in the parliament. He has won, although the majority of MPs of his own party voting against showed that his majority in a house of 600 odd members is very, very precarious. But let us not forget that Britain is not governed by a written constitution, a codified constitution. It is run by conventions, and conventions can be stretched like an elastic band almost to the breaking point. Not very many analysts were very hopeful that Boris Johnson will lose his job, because they say that over the past 4 decades and more, no British Prime Minister has lost a confidence vote, although none of them has also completed the full term. But well, in any case, to get back to Boris Johnson, what are the implications of his survival? One clear-cut implication is that for another year, no confidence motion can be presented against him, and he will probably, if other things go in his favor, survive his full term. He is very confident of doing so. But the reports, even the Susan Gray report, the senior civil servants report on the Partygate scandal, every day brings out a revelation which shows how deceitful Mr. Boris Johnson has been, how venal he has been, and how the corrupt nexus of he and his cronies has been there. So bring your bottle, get drunk till 4 in the morning, and all these scandals have made the British citizens feel that he is a liability. And the Conservative Party also realizes that although they do not have a better option than him at the moment, because Rishi Sunak, which was supposed to be Prime Minister in the waiting, is also tainted by the Partygate scandals. What are the Partygate scandals? The Partygate scandal is very simple, that the ruling class of Britain, the Prime Minister, his wife, his friends, his cabinet ministers, lived by one set of rules, and the rest of the British people were supposed to live by a separate set of rules. Many of them could not meet their near and dear ones during the COVID. For the last time, they could not even attend their funerals. And here these people were partying away as if there is no tomorrow. Now, this scandal would be difficult to live down in any other country. But in a country like Britain, which preaches morality, propriety, and swears by the conventions, seems to have failed very miserably in this. But that is a matter, to put it bluntly, between the British and their Prime Minister, the Conservative MPs and their leader. What we should be worried about is that now that Boris Johnson is rendered a lame duck Prime Minister, the chances of his passing any substantial legislation which he presents is very, very low. The impact on what might happen on the post-Brexit, he was trying to renegotiate the Irish backstop, or the Ireland, where the Sinn Féin party had come to assume power, or the Scottish resentments. All this he cannot very easily write over. He can try to manipulate, he can try to distract attention, he can try to posture, but none of this is going to help him. During the last phase, when this run up to the no confidence motion, we might say, he tried to strut on the international stage by either going to Ukraine, to Kyiv, or making statements about the Russian oligarchs. But it could not again be hidden that the British were dragging their feet, even because most of the Russian oligarchs' money is parked in Great Britain. And if Putin has mounted attacks on his ex-spies on British soil, Britain has not been able to control that itself. There are a whole lot of, there's a litany of failures of Boris Johnson, from his handling of COVID to the educational system being rigged, to the gender and race bias in the Metropolitan Police system, how the senior civil servants have been browbeaten. So all this is working against him. So those in India who had thought that a beleaguered, besieged Boris Johnson would provide a very interesting opportunity to India to forge closer relationship with Great Britain, seems to be misplaced, because the utility of Mr. Boris Johnson as a special friend of India, or the Prime Minister, is very, very severely curtailed as of this moment. The same applies to Boris Johnson's relationship with the Americans, Boris Johnson's relationship with the Europeans. So in the coming months, he is almost in midterm of his prime ministership, but the chances are that the Conservative MPs will see that if they go with him as their leader in the next general election, most of them would lose their own seats. The Labour, unfortunately, is not in a position, like the opposition in India, to challenge realistically, effectively the ruling party, but the mismanagement of the economy, mismanagement of healthcare, mismanagement of education system, and the race relations, all are militating against Boris Johnson. So that is their problem. Our problem is that we should be more realistic, assessing the course of our relationship with Britain in coming years. Another tragic shootout took place in America last week. 19 children and 2 teachers in a primary school were shot down. The shooter was again a young man who had just completed 18. And this once again underlined the stupidity and the brutality of the gun laws in America. Now, this is tragic because over the past 5 years, more than 5,000 people have lost their lives, in not only in schools, not only in churches, but in handgun related crimes. Acquiring a handgun or an assault rifle or a carbine is so easy in most states in America that there is a spate of these shootouts which are blind. Now, sad part is that the Americans, quite a large number of Americans, believe that bearing arms is their fundamental right for self-defense, which dates back to American Revolution. Now, the question which has been asked repeatedly is, quite all right that for self-defense an American must bear arms, but what about the rights of self-defense of those who are victims of these armed crimes, handgun crimes, shootouts? Now, also there has been a correlation between. Before we proceed any further, another point has to be made. There is a very powerful lobby in America, the National Rifle Association, which is the representative of the arms manufacturers, especially small arms, handguns, etc. And they export a lot of these, but they also are very keen to insist that no law should be changed. This bearing arms is a fundamental right. Now, the argument against the NRA is that how does an individual defend itself? Now, the most stupid counter argument was put forward by ex-President Trump, who said that the schools and hospitals, the soft targets, the churches, should be hardened. So their security should be hardened. And what was the idea of hardening the security is that you have strong brick walls, you have barbed wires, you have only one entry and exit, and you almost change schools and hospitals and churches into fortified constructions or prisons where children are expected to study. But then would they be safe? They would still have to go out to the playgrounds, and if there is a criminal, a shooter from within them, amongst them, how do you save it? I mean, is every student going to be frisked every time he walks in, walks out, and so on? The other argument which supporters of the gun lobby put forward is that there is nothing wrong with the guns. Guns don't kill people. People kill people. So it is a person suffering from a mental disorder in whose hand the gun becomes a weapon. Otherwise, you could have used a sword, a scimitar, a poison, or whatever it is, and would have done the same thing. Now, this leads us to a more fundamental question, that is there only the blindness of the gun lobby, NRA in America, which is responsible for this, or there are other pressure groups which impinge on the democratic process in America? One of them is Christian evangelism. The other is, of course, white supremacists, and white supremacists, Christian evangelists, and the gun lobbyists come together as one mass which stand against any reform which is to restrain this kind of a illiberal, brutal behavior. Now, also there is a need to analyze, why does a person, a youngster, lose his mental balance like this? Is it result of drugs? Is it result of broken families? Is it result of violence which is shown on television screen and on films? Is it because they want to get some kind of a momentary recognition by this kind of killing, serial crimes? Now, this young man who was responsible for the latest crime in Houston had just bought 2 assault rifles a couple of days after he became 18 years old, just attained the legal age of maturity of buying guns. Now, it is like, this is again not confined to America. Some senators who want to not lose their vote say that, look, we are not against American values, we are not against white supremacy, but not put it in such crude words. They would say, oh, we of course are not trying to say that people should not use arms, but not bear arms, but bear them responsibly. But different states have different laws, but this smuggling of arms across the borders is quite common, not only between one American state and another American state. The small arms smuggled from America across the border to Mexico result in the multiplication of gun-related crimes in Mexico and Brazil as well. So what one must see, that developing countries are often accused of using issues during electoral processes or for encashment of their vote banks, which fail to control a major problem. America itself seems to be suffering from a very major problem of reconciling these Luddite, these racist, these traditionalist, patriarchal ideas And when they are combined with the gun crimes, the lobbies which otherwise would have been ostracized, would have been boycotted, would have been isolated, gather support. The assault of pro-Trump crowd on the Capitol Hill was one example of this, when everything had gelled together. Unless the Americans look sharp and hard inwards, there is no solution which is apparent in this. It is not likely that the gun lobby will give it up easily, because it is big business. Similarly, the victims of gun crimes, how many of them are those who are from the poor slums where the colored people live or mixed blood people live? Or are they the perpetrators of gun crimes? And if they are using violence, using handguns to commit crimes, to kidnap, to blackmail, to extort, sometimes they are toy guns. But is it also because the whites, the rich, the affluent in the cities have tried to convert these areas into ghettos, and this is where the drug running takes place? So it might be a crooked policeman, it might be a systematic involvement of an organized criminal gang, but these are minor issues. The major issue is the mindset of a large number of Americans, which is not at home democratic, free from racial prejudice, and insistent on bearing arms for projection of macho masculinity, which is detrimental not only for America but for the whole world in the long run. A very interesting development, and dare we say a constructive development, has been the Indian initiative to open a dialogue with the Taliban in Afghanistan. A joint secretary from the Ministry of External Affairs went to Kabul to discuss ostensibly the supply of humanitarian aid which India is promised to Afghanistan, and to save the nation from getting into the grips of a humanitarian crisis. Some people think that they see more than meets the eye. They think this is India's initiative to very hesitatingly open a dialogue where an Indian embassy can be reopened. Actually, an Indian embassy has been functioning, providing basic services to Indian citizens stranded still in Afghanistan and others who want to use facilities by the local staff. But no time frame has been announced, but it is very clear now that sooner rather than later, Indians would also open their embassy in Kabul and staff it properly. The other thing is that the Indian Ministry of External Affairs has been very quick in pointing out that this should not be misconstrued as recognition of the Taliban regime. No government has recognized Taliban as yet, but they are doing business with them as usual, and they have a relationship with them. Now, the Indians obviously are wise to the fact that if they keep away from Afghanistan for long, boycotting the Taliban, others, especially Pakistan, would gain advantage, and the space for India to enter Afghanistan would keep shrinking. That's one. The other interesting thing is that I think the Indians have also realized that Taliban are not exactly at ease with the Al-Qaeda elements in Afghanistan, who fought with them during the anti-American war, but now are more or less behaving independently. They have had clashes with Pakistan border forces on the Eastern Front. But Indians would like to get an assurance from the Taliban that their interests at least would be safeguarded by the regime in Kabul, as much control as they can exercise over the Al-Qaeda forces or the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan forces or the Haqqani faction, which is part of the government. So part of the reason is to test waters, part of the reason is to push open the door a little, to hopefully enter a little later, and also maybe tempt the Taliban leadership with offers of rebuilding the nation, where India can probably play a better role than most other people. The Americans spent billions of dollars in Afghanistan, but not to build Afghanistan, not to rebuild war-ravaged Afghanistan, but only to make a military presence, provide protective cover to their protege, the puppet government in Kabul then. Now, the interesting part is this, that the Deputy Foreign Minister is an IMA trained officer in India, and it is believed that he has a good understanding of what Indian interests are there and is willing to build a bridge between the Taliban top leadership and the Indian government at the moment. Now, this is something which should not be dismissed very easily. I think the Indians at the moment are unfortunately besieged by a groundswell against it because of the insulting statements made by some irresponsible spokespersons of the ruling party in the Muslim world. So if they mend our bridges, if they mend our fences with Afghanistan, if we can reassure the Afghan leaders that India can be a very useful partner for them in post-war reconstruction, in providing better infrastructural services, training and equipment, and from hospital to education. But at the same time, the Indians should keep in mind that no sudden dramatic change in Taliban policy towards either women or towards very, very strict puritanical interpretation of Islam is going to be witnessed in very near future. So one should be prepared for a long haul, but one should take a certain amount of risk, prepared to pay a price for rebuilding relationship with Afghanistan. Now, there are two mistakes which Indians make very often when talking about Afghanistan. We talk of our centuries-old ties, cultural ties with Afghanistan. Let us not forget that it was this Taliban which destroyed a part of the priceless centuries-old heritage, the Bamiyan Buddhas, as breaking of idols. Nothing has changed since then and present day. All the hopes that the Taliban too was a very different kettle of fish has been belied. So India should realize this very much. The other thing, India should also not forget that other major powers would not very easily let India get a toehold in Afghanistan. Whether it is Pakistan, whether it is the Chinese waiting on the outside, or whether it is Turkey. So all these autocratic Islamic nations which share some kind of intolerant interpretation of Islam, the Taliban Afghan interpretation, they might be worried about the terroristic explosive nature of the Al-Qaeda or ISIS, but Taliban are not exactly peaceful people. Also it remains the Taliban continues to remain confined to Kabul. They do not have exclusive control over the territories controlled by warlords. The drug trafficking has not stopped, human trafficking has not stopped, the opium trade has not stopped, and major problem is to clear the cities and the roads and this infrastructure from mines, etc. Now all this will continue. So this is a time of waiting, but at the time there's a very interesting phrase which one of our diplomats, one of our more gifted diplomats, Vivek Kadju, used in a recent article of his, that the time has come for us to think of supping with the devil, but supping with the devil with a long spoon. Maintain a distance, don't compromise our interest by putting everything all together in one basket. Have a small incremental progress of what we want to do in Afghanistan and persuade the leadership by our actions, not by our speech, what we want to do, and make ourselves indispensable. Not talk of strategic depth, but talk in terms of rebuilding war-ravaged Afghanistan and helping them find their own progress and prosperity, and be generous with humanitarian assistance. This leads us to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. 105 days have been passed since Russia mounted this special operation. The country of Ukraine has been practically devastated. But what is now slowly registering on the world is that how important was Ukraine, the largest country geographically in Europe, fully in Europe. Russia was a Eurasian country. For the rest of them, it was the breadbasket not only of Russia, breadbasket of Europe also. It was a large supplier of oil seeds, sunflower oil. But more than the energy security which passed through Ukrainian pipelines, rather than the oil seeds and the wheat, what is more important is now slowly dawning on people that Ukraine was a place where the industrial belt, which now Russia occupies at the moment 20 to 25% of the land mass of Ukraine, but this was the industrialized part. This is where the factories were there which were manufacturing spare parts for weapon systems, for tanks, for planes, etc. Now many of these, before the Russians invaded Ukraine were being manufactured in Ukraine, passed on to Russia, and then transferred on to buyers who had been dependent on Russians for their military hardware. This has been severely interrupted. Talking of the food security, there again is a very close relationship between what the Russians claim as their own and have literally occupied the Donbass region, the Mariupol region, the Crimean Peninsula, and these were the only accesses from which the food grains, the edible oils would pass from Ukraine elsewhere. Now, due to the exigencies of war, the waterways have been very heavily mined, and unless these mines are swept, no cargo carrier could take away these food grains to where it is required most. So now the emphasis has shifted in the war in Ukraine when it goes into the fourth month. Nobody knows how long will it last, how long the bravado of Zelensky will last, how the Russians will retaliate to the increasing number of more precision, distant missiles they would react to. But the point is, the discussion now is, can there be a brief truce, if not a truce, a brief corridor, a narrow corridor carved out, which allows Russians to use this corridor to let Ukrainian food grains, oilseeds, etc. pass on. So this has two aspects. Russians would probably get a small respite from hard fighting. They would do some kind of a repolishing of their image, which has been badly damaged, that they are not totally unreasonable. They are not letting people in Europe to starve. So there has been posturing, and now the negotiations have shifted, rather than from the humanitarian corridors for let people take escape and refugees to go out, exchange of prisoners of war and so on, to the economic dimension of the war. Peace will take a long time to come to Ukraine still. What happens to the new crop? What happens to the new harvesting? Because the Ukrainians do not have warehouses to store the new crop when it is harvested. Can it be harvested safely when the fighting is going on? So this aspect of negotiations would now probably can be conducted a little more fruitfully than issuing ultimatums to either Putin about war crimes or about human rights violations, or to Zelensky about his neo-Nazi behavior or use of militias, etc. This is where I think, once again, maybe India can play a very critical, crucial role, because there is argument that India at one stage promised that if Ukrainian wheat is not going to reach the international market, Indians would help avert a humanitarian crisis elsewhere. But India again, although it's a very large producer of food grains, it has a large store, but it cannot neglect its own domestic requirements either. And as far as edible oils are concerned, India itself is facing a crisis of edible oils, thanks to the export ban imposed for a short while by Indonesia on palm oil, its relationship with Malaysia again on palm oils. So the Indians probably are not in as happy a position to relieve the pressure on the world on edible oils, but perhaps India can play a role. But more important than that, what India can provide, India can also be a party to a constructive consortium which negotiates the restoration of food security related trade from Ukraine to elsewhere. This is all we have for you this time. But before we conclude, we would like to have a quick revisionary look at what we have discussed with you. Several interesting things have happened, but the fundamental thing which we wanted to underline was to make clear to you the close intertwined relationship between the domestic politics of a country and its international diplomacy. The same was witnessed, encountered, where India had to face the wrath of the Muslim nations who were hurt by statements made by some Indians about Prophet Muhammad, and the fallout is yet to be assessed properly, and everybody at the moment is busy having damage control. The same kind of a problem one could see in the no confidence motion in Britain against Boris Johnson. It is certainly not a matter confined only to what happens to Conservative Party, its leadership, or the governance in Great Britain. It is likely to deal a mortal blow to the Prime Ministership of Boris Johnson. He may survive. He may even keeping his stars in mind, his lucky charm, fulfill his full term. But he would be what they call a lame duck prime minister, and he would not be in a position to pass any legislation of any impact, either dealing with Ireland, Scotland, or with European Union. The economy would suffer because people would be reluctant to invest and deal substantially with a leader whose own position is very, very weak at home. So there is, he would have to face challenges from within his party. He would have to face problems, deteriorating situation of economy in Great Britain, the race relations, the failure of dealing with COVID, and basically subverting the parliamentary system, which was one of those most majestic achievements of Great Britain. He has totally ruined that. So this is again going to impact on the diplomatic relations and the diplomatic stature of Great Britain. Not so much greatness would remain, survive after the prime ministership of Boris Johnson. I think the interesting development is again that recognition of reality. Now this is what happened is the ground reality cannot be overlooked all the time. You can't have a moralistic stand about everything. So however strong the objections of India were at Taliban assuming power in Kabul, not recognizing it, closing its embassy, making a hasty retreat back to India, and gloating over what they had done in bringing back Indians from Afghanistan in whatever limited number, I think that slowly it is dawning on Indians that they cannot remain absent from Afghanistan for long. Sooner or later, recognition may come much later, but some kind of a dialogue will have to be started with the top leadership of the Taliban. And this is what is being done. It would be a long haul. Taliban is not going to change their spots like a leopard overnight. They would continue to behave like a hardcore, fanatical, intolerant, fundamentalist Islamic regime. But India would have to live with it. India would have to live with them for a very simple reason, because of the strategic location of Afghanistan, not only of the inherent sensitivity of Afghanistan, but India's access to Central Asia, India's access to parts of Iran, and it depends so much. So we stop talking about strategic depth vis-a-vis Pakistan, but we talk in terms of what India can do in terms of reconstruction, rebuilding, development of Afghanistan. If we can succeed in doing that, even a long haul would be worth it, and then the policy would be restored. This brings us to the war in Ukraine, where the focus seems to have shifted from fighting on the ground to speculation about would there be a temporary truce to allow Ukraine to bring out its grain exported to countries in Europe and Africa, earn some much needed foreign exchange, and also save the world from facing a food security crisis. Wheat and oilseeds were two major exports of Ukraine. India was at one time eyeing the international wheat market. Could it substitute with its own crops what Ukraine was supplying? But slowly it has dawned on India that it cannot fulfill the role of Russia and Ukraine in terms of wheat supplying to the rest of the world. It can mitigate the suffering of the very hungry, of the very malnutrition, but it cannot take on the burden of feeding everybody in the world all by itself. The other thing it has to keep in mind is this, that what is likely going to be the impact of the continued Russian occupation, if not annexation, of Donbas and Crimean Peninsula, the industrialized part of Ukraine, where spare parts of military hardware were made, on which India was dependent from Russia. So think about this and spare a little thought about whatever is happening in Israel. We'll discuss with you in greater detail the next time. Till we meet again, thank you and goodbye.